Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break. Delighted to have you back with us, and I'm particularly pleased to be able to present to you two research projects that we funded during the pandemic. Great examples of how AWF can pivot and put funding just where it's needed to help draw out evidence-based research to help understand new challenges and new issues that we face in safeguarding animal health and welfare. We are first going to hear from Rowena Packer from the Royal Veterinary College. Rowena did a great project on pandemic puppies, exploring motivations and behaviours of UK owners acquiring puppies during the 2020 COVID-19 lockdown. We'll first hear from Rowena in a pre-recorded tape, and then Rowena will be joining us to answer your questions.
So, hi everyone, and thanks for the invite to speak today. In my talk, I'm going to be exploring the pandemic puppy phenomenon, and particularly focusing on how and why puppy buying changed in the UK during this unprecedented period. So since last March, we've all seen dramatic periods of lifestyle change, including home working, homeschooling, and self-isolation. During this period, there's been increased media reports of unusually high numbers of the public seeking to or actually purchasing puppies, with websites such as the Kennel Club's Find a Puppy tool seeing huge increases in inquiries compared to the same period in 2019. This uptick in demand led to three key areas of concern for the puppies and the dogs involved. Firstly, that people buying puppies during this period were doing so in an impulsive manner and may be unable or unsuited to keeping the dog after the pandemic. Secondly, that this unprecedented demand would encourage unscrupulous breeders to cash in, supporting puppy farming and the illegal importation of puppies. And finally, that puppies raised during this atypical period would lack socialisation and habituation experiences due to the restrictions imposed upon them and their owners. So I was interested in studying this phenomenon more closely and was kindly funded by AWF to undertake a study that described the motivations and behaviours of puppy buyers in the puppy buying process during the 2020 phase of the pandemic, and to compare this to normal UK puppy buying in 2019. We conducted an online cross-sectional survey with participants recruited via snowball sampling across social media and promotion via major UK veterinary and animal welfare organisations. Owners could be included in the study if they'd purchased rather than rescued or bred their puppy and had brought their puppy home while it was still under 16 weeks of age. We had a phenomenal response rate with over 7,500 responses, of which after cleaning over 6,500 were valid. Within this population, almost 4,500 were puppies that were purchased after the 23rd of March 2020, our pandemic puppy cohort, and a further 1,100 dogs who were purchased during the corresponding dates in 2019. Pandemic puppy owners had notable differences to pre-pandemic owners, being more likely to be first-time dog owners who had children in their household, particularly those aged 5 to 10 years. In terms of the pandemic puppy owners' motivations as to why they wanted to buy a puppy, they were more likely to want a dog that would improve their and their family's mental health. When looking for a specific breed or crossbreed, they were more likely to be seeking out a dog that was good with children, whose size suited their lifestyle, and they perceived was easy to train. When considering characteristics of a breeder that they would consider desirable, they're more likely to prioritise a breeder who offered good communication, but were less likely to seek a breeder who performed health tests or was a member of the Kennel Club's Assured Breeder Scheme. During the pre-purchase phase, pandemic puppy owners were more likely to report that they conducted pre-purchase research. However, when we looked more closely, this difference was explained by a corresponding reduction in owners who consider themselves experienced owners. Owners were more likely to use charity websites and talk to friends and family to conduct their pre-purchase research. In terms of actually finding their puppy, pandemic puppy owners were less likely to find their breeder via the Kennel Club's website. Once they'd found their puppy, they were less likely to visit it in person prior to purchase, with an over 20% reduction in pre-purchase visits. Instead, there was an uptick in owners viewing puppies via live video calls or via pre-recorded videos and photos. To secure their dog, pandemic puppy owners were more likely to place a pre-purchase deposit before they'd seen their puppy compared to 2019 owners. Financially, the cost of the puppies significantly increased during the pandemic, with an average 62% increase in price, and pandemic puppies significantly more likely to cost over £2,000. Pandemic puppies were bought at a younger age and were less likely to be seen inside their breeder's property, with an almost 30% reduction in puppies who were seen inside the property, but a 25% increase in puppies collected from outside the property, for example, on the doorstep or in the garden, and a small but significant increase in puppies that were delivered directly to their owner. Correspondingly, puppies were less likely to be viewed with their litter mates. Finally, pandemic puppy owners were less likely to ask whether their puppies' parents had undergone any health testing. And if they did ask for proof of health testing, they were less likely to be provided with it by the breeder. Within the pandemic puppy cohort, over 1 in 10 owners had not considered buying a puppy before the pandemic. Over 40% of owners felt that the pandemic had influenced their decision to purchase their puppy in some way. When we explored this more, the most common reason by far was that they had more time to care for a dog, with over 3/4 of owners citing this reason. So to discuss, our study has documented that the pandemic has been associated with changes in how and why puppies were acquired and by whom, and that this wasn't just pre-pandemic puppy buying at a greater scale. A number of welfare red flags have been highlighted throughout this study, most notably that the perfect environment the pandemic has created for unscrupulous breeders to appear legitimate, including the lack of pre-purchase visits, a lack of ability to collect puppies from inside breeders' homes, creating this ideal smokescreen combined with huge price increases fueling this market. There's also concerns of relinquishment risks due to the changes in owner lifestyle that are actively occurring during 2021 and beyond, as some people return physically to the workplace, with the major driver of having more time at home for a dog no longer being there for some households. There's also concerns over the lack of demand for health-tested puppies during this period, which may have led to riskier breeding decisions to fill demand and the potential for higher levels of inherited diseases in the future for this population. Finally, there's potential behavioural risks to both dogs and their owners. The inexperienced owner population described here, combined with the atypical environment that puppies are exposed to during their sensitive developmental period, may predispose these dogs to future behavioural problems. Additionally, the increase in dogs in households with first-time owners and children may increase paediatric bite risk, as has already been documented by Carrie Westgarth's research in Liverpool. So in conclusion, our findings indicate that greater support is likely needed from stakeholders, including the veterinary profession, animal welfare organisations and animal behaviour professionals, to where possible avoid and where present address some of the negative welfare outcomes that may arise in this population. The studies further highlighted many of the existing deficiencies in UK puppy buying culture and the need for ongoing education of prospective owners, human behaviour change interventions to improve puppy buying practices, and potentially further legislation to improve breeding practices where consumer demand isn't appropriately directed to affect positive welfare change. So what's next? We've just started a longitudinal cohort study of the pandemic puppy cohort I've just described here today to follow them over the next year and explore their health, behaviour and homing status, which has kindly been funded by Battersea. We've also been funded by U4 to explore within our existing cohort if and how the purchase of designer crosses, who increased in popularity during the pandemic, differs from that of acquisition of pedigree or crossbred dogs. If you're interested in what I have been talking about today, the first paper from this project has just been published in the journal Animals and is open access if you would like to read more. So to end, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the incredible pandemic puppy team, Claire Brand, Zoe Belshaw, Dan O'Neill, Camilla Pegram, Erin Burnett and Kim Stevens. Thank all of the incredible support from the UK canine welfare community who shared this study so widely and resulted in such a good sample size, many of whom have been listed here. And of course, thank you to the AWF for funding this work. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rowena. There's some really, really useful information in there and really useful evidence. I think one thing I've always reflected on through the course of the last 18 months is how some change is just an acceleration of change that was happening anyway. And some change is actually now behavioural change that is embedded because of the length of the pandemic and the length of the lockdowns. When you've looked at what's happened through the course of the pandemic and the way it's changed behaviour, which elements do you think are now embedded and will stay with us in terms of puppy purchasing behaviour? I'm particularly thinking of the online approach to it, which is very different to the emphasis that was there before in how people found and sourced puppies. How do you see it going forward?
I think I share that as a major concern, is the online market being the predominant source of dogs, particularly for young people, and some of the practices that have come about in the last year that young people might just see as just in line with their normal day-to-day purchasing. So being able to click and collect dogs in the same way that you can, or have them delivered indeed, as you can with your Amazon parcels and all of the various ways that you've sourced products throughout the more strict periods of lockdown. So I worry that some of those features of puppy buying last year and indeed this year will stay longer term, because potentially some more uninitiated puppy buyers might not realise that that is potential smokescreen, and that it's not the breeders being kind, or it's not the breeders trying to help you out by meeting you halfway, or by making the process expedited via the online system, but actually it's a good way of them to hide their practices. So yeah, I think the regulation and a better understanding of the online sales environment is really key going forwards.
And Aruna, did you get any sense of how this will also affect rehoming of dogs and older dogs being moved between homes? Did you get a sense of that in the online area as well, or not?
So the dogs that we studied here were first time purchase dogs. So these are puppies that were bought under 16 weeks. We're currently following, as we said, the 2020 cohort. So we will be looking at relinquishment or considered relinquishment. So as particularly as was highlighted earlier, this month with furlough ending and with potential further changes to lifestyle, whether we see some of those dogs being rehomed. We know there has already been a market for pandemic puppies being resold. So through the online system, often puppies that are being sold aren't in that typical age bracket of being around 8 to 12 weeks, but instead being much older, and people trying to again recoup costs from some eye-wateringly expensive purchases last year. So I think that's definitely a situation to watch, to make sure those dogs, if there is a need for them to be rehomed, that they're appropriately rehomed, not passed on to another inappropriate home.
Thank you. Now there's a second question in from Matt Dobbs. Do you know anything about the trends in rehoming dogs from overseas and how these are impacting the UK market?
We didn't study this specifically, but we've had plenty of contact with people saying that they have been shocked by the rescue, the unofficial rescue and smaller rescue market being flooded with dogs from overseas. One of the reasons, so we asked owners about whether it was their first choice of breed and why they chose to buy a dog, and in some cases it was that they were thwarted from being able to rescue for many reasons, including dogs not being appropriate for them, or perceived barriers to their individual situation, not being allowed to rescue or not being permitted to rescue dogs. So I think that again is something that's important. I was interested watching one of the student presentations on imported dogs earlier, and I think it's a really key area, given that market seems to be growing. I hesitate to call it a market, but I guess there is money involved going forwards, to see whether that again is another way to fill that huge demand. Whether that's better or worse from a welfare perspective than the illegitimate means by which puppies have been bred in the last year is a question, I guess, to debate. I'm sure neither is perfect, but important to consider.
And just to wrap up with the puppies, did you get a sense that any of those were bred abroad and brought in? Did the new owners know whether the puppy was born in the UK or not?
Yeah, so we have a second paper that should be upcoming in the next month or so, which is specifically focusing on the features and the demographics of the puppies, and we found a significant increase in puppies who were sold with a passport in 2020 compared to 2019. And again, I think a lot of owners being quite innocent to not realising what that actually might mean. So yeah, more to dig into there.
Okay, thank you very much, Rowena.
Thanks,
There's so much more we could talk to you about. I'm sorry that it's a bit of a short Q&A session, but perhaps we can hear from you again at another AWF event.